Well, good morning and welcome, folks. You are in the OpenDaylight Mini Summit. If that was not where you were intending to go, then you should go someplace else. And the folks outside could point you there. So we've got a great set of sessions for today. We're going to kick this mini summit off with a little small keynote from Neela Jacques, the Executive Director of OpenDaylight. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about the platform and also talk through specifically what you can expect for the rest of the day. So with that, help me welcome Neela Jacques, the Executive Director of OpenDaylight, to the stage.
Perfect. So hi, everybody. My name is Neela Jacques. I'm the Executive Director of the OpenDaylight Project, as Phil said. And what I wanted to do for this morning is reflect a little bit on how far we have come. April 1st was our 3rd year anniversary of OpenDaylight. And so what I've been asked to do is to give a little bit of a state of the project, state of the union. For those of you familiar in the United States, the president once a year gives a State of the Union address to talk about how the country has been over the last year. I'm going to do something similar to that this morning. Specifically, I want to talk about 3 things. The first one is the state of our community, and talk a little bit about where we are as a global community today in 2016. The second thing that I want to cover is the state of our code base. Because at the end of the day, while we're a great group of people working together, if we don't produce great code that is useful, we're really just having a bunch of drinks. And the third thing I want to talk about is the state of the project from the standpoint of, are people actually doing anything with this code? Are we solving real problems? And where are we in terms of end user adoption and participation in the project? So let me start with the first one, the state of the community. It's interesting to think that over the course of the last 3 years, slightly more than 3 years, we have had a changing of the guard that has happened about 2 times. If you look at it, while there are many people who are still involved and were involved at the beginning, the majority of people contributing to the OpenDaylight code in 2016 were not engaged in the project last year or the year before that. What we've seen is people coming into the project, working upstream, and then going and building proprietary products that plug into the platform. What we've seen is that we've had new people come in, we've had other people go do other things. Overall, the growth has been tremendous. I checked just this morning before I got on stage. As of right now, or at least as of 10 minutes ago, 696 people in the world have contributed code to the OpenDaylight project. But what I think is most amazing is that our community, from a community feel, from a community behavior, hasn't changed. Our culture is the same incredible culture that we had when there were 30, 50, 100 people contributing to the code base. And I think that that is actually something that is quite amazing. I hear over and over again that when people come in and work in OpenDaylight, bar none, they have a great experience. One of the first things that I sought to do when I joined the OpenDaylight project is understand what were our community values and how could we foster even greater collaboration among people. Because as some of you, hope you'll recognize this, this movie reference, but in a sense, open source is a little bit like Soylent Green. At the end of the day, it's people. Anyone? No. If you haven't seen it, go YouTube Soylent Green. And so I actually wanted to tell you an interesting anecdote here, because this is something that I wish people would talk about a little bit more among themselves. I think one of the first challenges I see is when people assume that our community is like that of others. And I see too many people who are tentative. They're doing something, they've downloaded the code, and they're really being stealth. They're sitting in their corner, and they're struggling as they're trying to install something or get something to work. And what I wish that they would do is simply reach out. Reach out to me, reach out to Phil, reach out to a developer on the list. Because the experience, bar none, that I hear over and over again is when people do that, the community steps up and helps them. And so I want to tell you this interesting little story about, it was probably about a year ago. I got an email from a guy named Alphonse Mittenmeier here in Berlin, from Berlin. And he said to me, he said, you know, we're doing this little project. I don't know if you remember me. I grabbed you at some conference. I'm doing this project. We've been trying to build this code on this other open source project, and it's just not working, and it's not going well. I'm thinking of maybe doing it on OpenDaylight. The problem is we're not experts on OpenDaylight. I'm working with this guy named Martin, who's sitting right here, actually. And I don't know. Can you tell me, why should we use OpenDaylight? How are you different from that other project? Sort of sends me this email. I'm guessing he's not expecting very much from me. And my immediate response was, Martin, thank you very much for reaching out to me. I personally don't have the time to get on the phone and help you. But let me make some introductions to a few different people within our community. And I shot emails to somewhere between 8 and 10 individuals within the OpenDaylight community all over the world. And I said, this guy's trying to do this. I think it's really cool. Is there someone willing to help? And I was expecting 1 or 2 people would step up. Martin, do you remember how many people emailed back from that?
Everybody of those 10 emailed back, and we had phone conferences with everybody.
Think about that for a second. I send an email, no, you need to do this, it's really important. 8 to 10 people respond. Not only do they respond, but they're willing to jump on a conference call. And over the course of the next 6 to 9 months, from what I understand, your team got tremendous support, including from the gentleman who is sitting right next to you, who seems like you've become close friends at this point. And their success, their proof of concept, as I understand, was very successful. They're now going to a second stage and building on it. And it's just, for me, a testament to the kind of community that we have. I was recently in China, and somebody was sharing with me that they were really surprised as they were running into an issue. And they put an email out to a list. And a vendor that they didn't particularly like, that they, in fact, weren't spending any money with, had an employee who was working on OpenDaylight on the list, and they were shocked that the employee responded to one of their questions. And in fact, spend time helping them be successful. And their comment to me is, why are these people helping me? What's in it for them? To which I said, welcome to open source and welcome to OpenDaylight. Because this behavior is not the exception. This behavior is the rule. I talked about if you've seen the keynote to my first OpenDaylight Summit, you saw me talk about this kind of behavior when we were a really small group and people felt really special because they were the first people who'd found OpenDaylight. 3 years later, our project, which has now grown 7 to 8-fold, which is full of different people, still has the exact same behavior. We've just scaled it up. And so I have to share, I'm personally incredibly proud of the kind of community that we have. Of the way some of you listening to this say, yeah, that's me. I'm the guy who asked the question, or I'm the guy who answered it. I'm guessing a few of you are sitting there going, I haven't experienced this yet. And my guess is it's probably because you haven't asked. If you've asked 1 or 2 times and it didn't work, ask again. But this is something I care very much about. I believe that our project is successful because people enjoy working in the project, because people help each other in the project. I do think it's critical because our goal is so broad. We are not trying to solve one little problem. We're trying to build a broad platform, a set of technology that can be used for so many use cases that inherently simplicity is difficult in OpenDaylight. It is difficult to achieve simplicity, and so in the early years, it takes some work. Every one of you who is sitting there, who is sitting here, either has experience or will experience the challenges of being new to the project, of trying to understand what are these 50 different projects about? What's going on? What is an MD-SAL? Yang tools? How does that work? Yet what's great is as much as our documentation is improving, as much as the wiki is broad, but doesn't have every answer to everything or isn't necessarily easy to find everything, of course, our community is there and ready to help and support. And the other things I believe will continue to evolve. They're 100 times better than they were 3 years ago, and they'll be 100 times better in 2 years. But the community of people that is there and willing is why, as a project, we're certainly becoming the de facto standard SDN platform in the industry. So that's the community side. And please, I want to thank you for what you've done, and I want to urge you to do more, to reach more out, to continue to show this behavior. The second thing, as I said, is what does this community do? This community builds code. We're not a standards organization. We're not about doing meaningless press releases. Other people are there to do that, nor are we a drinking club. We're, at the end of the day, a coding club. So how are we doing with our coding? What's really interesting here again is if you look at the OpenDaylight project and what we've done in 3 years, it is actually quite unique. If you look in the history of open source projects, the success and survivorship rate in an open source project is not that different from that of a startup. The vast majority of open source projects, 98+%, never reach anywhere near the size and success that OpenDaylight has. One of the first questions was, could these people collaborate and could we put out a cadence, a regular cadence of high quality releases? We as a community have demonstrated that we do that, that we do that. Every 6 to 8 months roughly, we've come out with a new release, and each release has pushed the envelope. Pushed the envelope from a quality standpoint and pushed the envelope from a capabilities standpoint. If you look at the quality of our code base, less than 3 years in, it is shocking. It is fundamentally different from that of most similar code bases in the world by how complete, by how performant our code is today. OpenDaylight, in less than 3 years, has now been deployed over 150 times in the world. It's being used in productions on some of the biggest networks in the world at scale. At the OpenDaylight Summit, I'm putting together a panel, which I think is going to be incredible, of people talking about SDN at scale. And they're not going to be talking theoretically, they're going to be talking practically about how they've scaled SDN. So if you think about it, if you're at a company and you say, I want to build a new product, how likely is it that in 3 years you can have 150 deployments on some of the biggest networks in the world? Very unlikely. But in this crazy, weird, distributed community, we have done exactly that. And so again, I'm very proud of where we have gone. Our ability to resolve tough technical differences. Some of you may not realize or remember this, but we've had a number of really interesting technical crises. As a project, we had fundamental disagreements about how to do a service abstraction layer. Whether or not a controller should do just one protocol and maybe hardwire a couple others, or should have a service abstraction layer, and what kind of service abstraction layer that we would have. Today, the vast majority of people say that the MD-SAL is one of the strong highlights, one of the reasons that they want to work with the OpenDaylight code base. I hear developers who love the ability to write an application on top of the MD-SAL. Yet there was a time when Phil and I wondered whether we're going to have to rip out the MD-SAL or not go there, because we had a huge percentage of our community who just didn't think it was the right approach. And while I expect the MD-SAL will continue to evolve and doesn't necessarily need to evolve to become simpler and easier to do things with, it's great to see our community be able to come together, really debate with passion, with strong disagreements, and yet at the end of the day be able to be constructive, to be practical, to accept a technology and to move forward with it. And we've seen this over and over again. And one of the big debates going on within the community right now is around this question of singularity. How do we, on one hand, allow many different projects to come up, people to compete with each other, technologies to compete with each other, yet at the same time push and funnel a certain level of standardization. How do we go towards having singular platform elements that are broadly leveraged by a lot of folks that can allow us to focus our resources? But what's interesting is the hard part of that debate has actually already been solved. As a community, outside of what we put in writing, what we've seen is we have a community that's tremendously supportive of new people coming in with new ideas, trying things out, trying to form things, and we've actually started to get quite good at getting multiple groups to collaborate together around a technology that looks promising and is working. And I think, again, this is a very hard balance to strike, and we're doing a very good job of it. And so, where is the state of our code base today? Pretty darn impressive. But how do I know that? Does it matter? I think this gets to the third and probably most important parts of the state of our project today. At 3 years in, we've seen this very interesting transition that is happening. An open source project, by its very nature, must begin by being highly developer-centric. When you begin an open source project, the only thing you have are developers. Maybe you have a little foundation, but a little foundation and a bunch of developers. You don't really have code. You certainly don't have any users because they've got no code to use. But what's been interesting, again, over the last 3 years is how users have done exactly what we would expect them to do. They've begun to come in and walk the three-stage process, the three gates that we see so often happening in open source. They begin trying to figure out if they can leverage this code base for themselves. And so we saw AT&T in our first release pick up OpenDaylight and go, great, here it is, what can I do with it? And they looked at it and they went, ah, this isn't ready for production. No kidding, it was the first release of an open source project. Yet to their credit, they came back and rather than say, all these things are wrong and broken, you're awful, we're leaving, they came and said, all these things are broken and need to be fixed. Can we help you fix them? And they did. And they've been coming and investing repeatedly over every release and every dev forum. They're here at this show in some pretty impressive numbers. And what we've seen over the last 3 years is more and more end users joining and participating. Over the last year, we have seen the OpenDaylight Advisory Group really come into their own. For those of you who don't know it, this brings together roughly 15 or 20 of the top network architects around the world. They work for most of the major carriers, but also some enterprises. Today, we announced that the newest advisory group member, Kevin Brackpool from Vodafone, has joined. And it's great to see that as I stand here in Europe, we've got a great contingent from Europe. We've got a great contingent from the United States. We've got a great contingent from Asia. This is truly a global group, and they together share their own experiences. To give you a taste of how it goes, I'm thinking of an advisory group meeting a few months ago. Tencent, if you know Tencent from China, they run something called WeChat, gets on and says, here's a problem that we had. Our gaming customers sometimes experience poor bandwidth or latency. And when their games start to pixelate or don't work well, they turn it off. And after a while, if that happens too often, they churn, they leave, and we don't make any money from them. So we need to solve this. So what we did is that we used OpenDaylight, and we are doing BGP route optimization to force the route down to the carrier. And of course, I've got half the world's major carriers on this call, and so they jump in and they say, what? You can't do that. This is horrible. Why are you messing with our networks? This is the worst thing in the world. And Tencent, said, we have a business objective, and I'm losing money if I don't do this. So give me a better solution, but this is in theory. This is something I've implemented and it's in production. And you then saw over the next 40 minutes the top network architects of the largest carriers and a whole bunch of others all discussing and debating the different ways this solution could be solved and what they're doing. And they're going from what it could be to what has actually been created. Really interesting discussion that could have happened nowhere else in the world that I know of. Wouldn't have happened in a standard body, wouldn't have happened in an executive briefing. This is what's special about open source projects, and this is the impact that we're starting to have today. So as I said, we're at a place today where end users are becoming more and more active. I've got more and more end users who are joining. We're also seeing as a project, we're still seeing the investment from the largest, most mature companies. We're seeing a lot more fast-growing startups, whether they are on the application or are supporting people and making real money. I was just talking to a couple different companies who were talking to me about their OpenDaylight-based business and how they're making real revenue in tying value around OpenDaylight. We're seeing value coming from the end users. We're seeing value from the ecosystem and community around it. So all of these elements that are an indication of a very successful open source project. And so to conclude the presentation, I wanted to leave you with a few thoughts. The first one, as I said, is our community is by far the most important thing. Phil and I have a debate sometime. He tells me developers are the most important people on earth, and I say I think the developers are really, really important. But I actually think there are many people who add value, and different people have different ways of adding value. It's people, it's the community. Yes, I love my developers, but I also love all the other people who are engaged in OpenDaylight. And we need to continue to feed that and grow that. And if you're here and you're not yet engaged, come talk to me, talk to Phil, but honestly, talk to the person sitting to the left of you, because they're probably getting a lot of value out of OpenDaylight. The second sort of big thought that I wanted to leave you with was from a code base, we are not trying to build products. We're not trying to solve one specific use case. OpenDaylight is about building a technology code base. It is about building a platform that you leverage to build products and solutions. The biggest problem that you get is when people come to OpenDaylight with the wrong expectation. If you're savvy and you have developers and want to build a product yourself or a solution yourself on our code base, go download our code. On the other hand, those aren't the skills that you have or you want to have. That's great. Go find someone in the community that does that, whether it's a vendor with a product or whether it is an organization that will help support you in building a product. We have the full gamut. Just make sure that you're clear about your role, how you want to participate, because what I find is when people come in with the right expectation, they love working in our community. And finally, the shift from solely developer focus to developers and end users is a very, very important one. End users are critical to what we do and to everything that we do. If you're an end user and you're not as engaged right now, get more engaged. I'm so excited. We issued a press release this morning. For the first time ever, we have 3 end users coming together to submit a technical project in OpenDaylight. Orange, Telia, and AT&T are working together on the NetIDE project. This is incredibly awesome. We've had other end users participate, do their own project, but seeing collaboration among end users in the project is showing that tide change happening. This is a good thing for our community and is something all of us should work to support and help. And if you come to the OpenDaylight Summit in September 27th through 29th outside of Seattle, you'll see end user after end users talking about how they're leveraging OpenDaylight, how it is solving real problems, but also talking about what needs to change and what needs to evolve. There are so many things we can do with our broad platform. We're just scratching the surface. So there's a lot of work that needs to be still done. And so with that, I want to hand it back to Phil. Phil will talk a little bit about the technical sessions that we've got for the rest of the day here. Thank you very much for taking a day out of your busy lives to come here and participate in the OpenDaylight Euro Mini Summit.
All right, very good. Thank you. So we've got about 10 minutes, and I've got more material than 10 minutes. So I want to hone this to what best serves us here. So first question, how many folks have actively been using OpenDaylight for a while and are familiar with it? Raise your hands. Okay. Those that are pretty much brand new with it and don't understand it much at all and would really like to? Okay, a few. What? Or understand it? Yes, there you go. All right, so let me go through these. Let me go through these really quickly. Wanted to talk just a little bit about the fundamental architecture. So this is the slide of our Beryllium release, our most recent release. What I really want to just talk about here is that fundamentally we've got an API layer that sits at the top. We've got a set of services. These are all, by and large, autonomous services. Certainly some depend upon the others. But the point being is, again, as a platform, you can make a lot of different things out of OpenDaylight. Nobody will ever use all of those services at the same time. That's not the expectation, right? But it is really about being able to pick and choose what it is you want. Similarly, we have a whole set of protocols that are down on the southbound side. Again, we're not expecting anybody to actually want to use all of them all at the same time. But again, you've got OpenFlow, OVSDB. Is that as blurry to you as it is to me? Anyway, that might be something to look at. Thanks. So a variety of southbound protocols. And then, again, the unique thing that Neela had mentioned was we've got an abstraction layer in the middle. And that abstraction layer is model-driven, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And that's really the way that you can plug in the different pieces to actually make the controller to do what you want it to do. And at this point, we've got folks that are using OpenDaylight for fundamentally non-SDN activities. And that continues to evolve because it is a general platform that, again, creates services, expose a northbound API, typically REST, or RESTconf or netconf in some model to the north. And again, implement your protocol of choice to the south to manage whatever devices, network or not, that you actually want to work with. Briefly, we do care specifically about OpenStack. So we do have a lot of work that continues to go on OpenStack. We've got a variety of service providers, be it OVSDB, NetVirt, group-based policy, virtual tenant networking, Lisp flow mapper, and the network intent composition projects are all different providers and provide different functionality for an OpenStack instance. And given that NFV is, and OPNFV in particular, is commonly reliant on OpenStack, that's kind of important to us. We came to the realization, again, when we looked at the architecture and this project started, it was really, we were looking at it from, 3 tiers. We've got some applications, we have that abstraction layer, and we've got, it talking to different protocols. But what we came to the realization of was, as we transitioned from our original service abstraction layer concept to the model-driven one, it was really more about, you've got applications at the top, again, protocols at the bottom. That was the original service abstraction layer. We kind of moved to one where we wanted you to be able to define a model, okay, and we use Yang for that modeling language. And out of that modeling language, you then run it through a set of tools, Yang tools, that Neela mentioned. And that actually allows you to create an API, a consistent API set for any service, so that you can expose what your services are through a common API, and that's done, and again, in a very uniform way, because it's done in an automated fashion. So if you've got an application, that's what you're doing. In the end, the protocols were the exact same, right? You model that protocol, you actually run it through the tools, you fill in the code based on what comes out of the Yang tools, and again, you get a consistent set of APIs. So an application then talks through those APIs. Doesn't really matter if it's an application or if it's a plugin. I'll go a little bit longer here. So in the end, it was really just 2 layers. You got things that look like applications and protocols, and you've got the abstraction layer that, in the end, kind of looks like a microservices architecture, because everything is modeled in Yang, and that's how it's stored in the data store. That's how you actually transmit messages through the message bus. And so that is our common language. And any services can then be created. And of course, the controller is then clustered so that you have a robust SDN controller platform. Doesn't really matter where the providers are. They can be inside the controller proper, like all of those services that I showed you, and have the consumers that are external to that controller. The providers can be external, and again, provide to consumers that are internal or external. This is actually an example of our OpenFlow pipeline. All right, so you've got applications that are talking through RESTconf or NetConf. They want something to happen in the network, so that changes the OpenFlow inventory through the configuration store. Our model-driven SAO has two different sides to its data store. It's got the configuration side, which is what the applications are telling the network it wants it to do. And we have the operational side, which is the network devices telling the controller what's really going on or what the real state of the network is. So when that happens, again, forwarding rules manager gets notified through a data change notification. That then goes to the OpenFlow plugin, talks through OpenFlow out to whatever the switch's state changes. That ends up changing the operational data store. And then you get another notification to the topology manager so that the OpenFlow topology changes. Right? So that's kind of the way these pieces then fit together, but they were all defined independently through those Yang models as different services. I was going to go through a variety of the features here in Beryllium, but I'll save that for another time. What's coming in Boron, again, as Neela said, as we do every release, we're always working on performance, we're always working on scale, we're always working on security, as well as stability. Significant evolution in our ML2 driver for OpenStack. Continued work on all of the advanced features. The next presentation actually is going to talk about service function chaining. And then I'm going to post these slides. I'm going to let you go ahead and take a look at these later so that we don't run out of time. Interesting for me, as Neela mentioned, we've got the project with Orange, AT&T, and Telecenera. We've got Korea Telecom, who's come with a transport network project here, the SPTN project. Similarly, China Mobile, actually that's not true. They came with POTN, with the Packet Optical Transport Network project. We've got China Mobile, who came with SPTN. And then, as Neela mentioned, Orange, Telecenera, and AT&T are actually working on transport PCE. So to get started, OpenDaylight.org.start. What we've got going today, again, next we've got a session with Chris Price and Brady Johnson talking about service function chaining. We'll take a short break then. Then we've got a whole hour-long session talking about different ways you can use BGP through OpenDaylight. We've got a Carrier Ethernet 2 for backhaul presentation after that. Then we'll break for lunch. We're going to have a user panel, and I'm really going to try to set this user panel up as a very interactive discussion. I want to hear what folks are doing. I want to hear where their challenges are. We can focus on NFV-based challenges, or we can expand it. I want to see how that really goes. But I really want it to be interactive so that I can learn something and you can learn something as well. Then then Alec Lecky will talk about one of the projects called NetIDE, which is a very interesting project on allowing applications developed for other controllers to be able to leverage OpenDaylight, and similarly, if it was built for OpenDaylight, you can leverage other controllers. So a great deal of flexibility for end users. Then Stephen Kitt's going to talk about building applications on OpenDaylight. We're going to talk a little bit about an Eclipse workspace that's now available for OpenDaylight, and we'll close with an adaptive SDN networks presentation that's really talking about some of the key features around getting network state out of OpenFlow 1.4 and being able to actually leverage that and react to it with an OpenDaylight controller. So, very good. We're on time. So with that, I'm going to invite Chris Price and Brady Johnson up, and we'll go right into the service function chaining project.